Hey, what up? Gabriel here. And I have finally done it. I finally figure out a way to get some analysis on the Brotato run data. Um, so first and foremost, I want to shout out, give a big thanks to Snazar. He is the creator of the Run History mod in Brotato. You can subscribe to that on the Steam Workshop. And I would just do it if you haven't yet, because the problem is by default Brotato does not keep your run history, and without that mod, you're not going to get any actual history created. And as such, this is an incomplete data set because obviously I only have data from the point that I installed that mod onward. So I highly recommend getting that mod if you're ever interested in doing something like this. I probably won't be able to do like a full tutorial on how I kind of took that data and worked with it to be able to kind of analyze it a bit further. But that being said, I will put an email address in the description of this video. I always use that email address for if anyone ever wants to send me their run data for a game like Brotato. I'm more than happy to kind of generate the reports that you're going to end up seeing in this video. And also, I'd also selfishly like to just gather as much data as possible to eventually do kind of an analysis on this data from multiple users instead of just my own data. So yeah, and just to clarify, this is only my own run data. It's all in danger level 5, and I was able to get it so that I have both my PC and Steam Deck data included here. Turns out I have a lot of assumptions. And I'm not going to try to draw too many unnecessary conclusions from this data. There's only so many runs I've been able to do while recording them, or recording the run history, I should say. But there's just not a gigantic sample size, so there's not too many conclusions I can draw, but I am just interested in getting some insights. And I do think I've already seen a few insights that I've gotten from this data that kind of went against my assumptions. And that's the main thing I like to see. I like to see, are my assumptions correct when I'm just trying to feel out the game? For instance, am I actually doing well with X and Y character, or is this item seem to have some sort of a positive or negative effect on my win rate, etc., etc. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of context to a lot of this. I tried to add a few filters to a lot of these pages that I'm going to go over, because in a lot of cases, you're going to see as I pop open this sucker here, you're going to see some pretty wild stuff, and I'm going to try to explain. There's a lot of context that surrounds a lot of them. Some of them make the data less legit than others, just because of maybe wonky stuff I was trying to do. But I'll just sort of explain that as it goes. So let's go ahead and get into it first here with looking at our character data. So I'm just going to sort by wins right now, just so I get I put a total here. So this is kind of what we're looking at. 240 total runs that I analyzed. My win rate was a little under 30% for it. And the first assumption is I knew I wasn't doing amazing, but I will say the win rate was definitely lower than I expected it to be. Certainly gets brought down a lot by some of these characters. Like I could remove a few of the bad characters, and it does get up a little bit better, but still not like an incredible win rate by any means. And that's fine. I expect now, hopefully, as I play, that I can up that win rate. Now, the first assumption that I had actually proved wrong. I always assumed that I played better on my Steam Deck, because on my Steam Deck, I was able to use manual aim, whereas it just doesn't work on my PC. So first thing I'm going to say is right now I'm just looking at both PC and Steam Deck, but if I switch it to main PC, you'll see that I actually have a 29.6% win rate. If I switch to Steam Deck, it's a 28.2% win rate. It's basically negligible, but it's slightly less on the Steam Deck. I was expecting I was actually going to have a higher win rate on the Steam Deck, but that definitely did not end up being the case. And that's probably the only time I'm gonna, in this video, switch between the Steam Deck and main PC data, because honestly, there didn't end up being that much interesting differences between if I played it on the Steam Deck or the PC. I actually play it pretty similarly, it turns out. But yeah, so right now we're just sorting by total wins. You'll notice I don't tend to really spam characters that I find easy, other than I guess Doctor, but a little bit of context there is like at some point I should I should also mention I'm probably gonna just release this video that you're watching right now like the day after I make it, whereas most of my actual run videos are about 2 weeks ahead of time. So you're gonna see a few things that basically haven't happened on the channel yet, and one of them is like I go through kind of some random runs, and it just happened to keep giving me Doctor a bunch. So there is some context there. But either way, Doctor, one thing I can glean from this data at least is, 5-0, not a huge sample size, but certainly seems to be a character I'm pretty comfortable with. Now, One Arm, unfortunately, I'll give a little bit of context here. There are going to be some videos coming up where I basically try to do like every weapon on One Arm. And it turns out most of the weapons suck if you don't use the like 2 or 3 that are really good on him. And that probably accounts for 10 to 12 of these losses. But I will say, beyond that, it does kind of suck, because I know for a fact before I enabled this run history mod, I had a pretty good win streak of one-armed runs that weren't captured here. But all that being said, I could probably be willing to eat some crow on one-armed. I'd always kind of said I thought the character was pretty strong, but all that being considered, if I subtract out maybe 12 losses or so, for whatever it's worth on this subset of runs we're looking at, one arm really didn't do too well for me. Or still turns out to be like 4 and maybe we'll say 16 or 14 or something. And so I could be willing to eat crow on one-armed, but I would like to play him more and like take him a little bit more seriously. I did include the ability to put a time range in, so what I could do is maybe a month or 2 from now, just look at what I did from basically the point of this video to then and see if these stats wildly change. But I will say the one-arm stats came in way lower than I expected them to be, because in my mind it was like a pretty good character for me, but that clearly isn't the case here. Other than that, we could also just sort by the win rate here. So obviously we have a bunch, as I said, the ones I tend to find strong, I just don't really play a whole lot necessarily. I thought maybe I would on my Steam Deck, because usually when I'm playing on my Steam Deck, I'm pretty casual, not really wanting to push myself that hard. But for whatever reason, it seemed like I didn't really spam, like one arm tend to be like the one I played a lot on Steam Deck as well. But it seems like I didn't really win with them actually. But now if I go the other way with the win rate, now we're looking at a few here. Now obviously we can see, a few of these I've clearly won with. I even have a few videos of me winning with them, but because I didn't enable the run history mod, those wins weren't captured. So there are a few up here in the data set that actually don't even have wins. Now, this is probably one of the big ones. Explorer, who I think I originally rated like S or A tier, I think S tier. I could definitely be willing to eat crow on Explorer, because I have not had a great time with Explorer in the latest set of runs. You can see here I went 0 and 5 with it. I also put an average wave reached to see if that was interesting. It didn't end up really being an interesting data point, so I'm not really going to touch much on the average wave reach. But below, in a few minutes, we're going to look at the wave specific data, and I think that's somewhat interesting. But anyway, so there's a few that are at 0, and now there's a there's a few here that we talked about one arm, but fisherman. Now the funny thing here with both fisherman and streamer is those are two characters that have been in my F tier. And what's not captured here is before I enabled the run history mod, I probably have at least as many losses with only like one win on each of them. Because that was my initial like struggle, and maybe even more losses. So as bad as these streamer and fisherman stats are here, they're probably even worse if I were to actually have a data set going back further. Now the funny thing here is, remember when I had ranked Jack as worst in the game, worst character in the game? Well, you notice Jack's not really showing up in the bad win rate column here. If you may have caught it looking at this, but actually I'm 3-0 with Jack on this data set. Now, the context here is, and you'll see one video coming up because I know I recorded one of these Jack runs, but I don't know. I will say, in my tier list, I no longer rank Jack as the worst in the game. I had Fisherman and Chunky ranked worst, but maybe I could add Streamer to that. But I do feel like Streamer theoretically is just better than them for me. But yeah, for what it's worth, I went 3-0 with Jack. But I will say in those 3 wins, I seem to have pretty good luck. And actually, beyond items and whatnot, we're going to take a look at elites as well. And you're going to see some stuff there that kind of supports. Well, we'll get to that when I get to that. But yeah, any other, I'll just scroll through this. I can't really talk about every character, but it is definitely interesting that Streamer and Fisherman are so bad. And Chunky was pretty bad too. Where's Chunky? Yeah, 2 and 9. And again, Chunky would have easily these stats, these bad of stats, had I captured them. Going back further. Anything else interesting here? Well-rounded. I don't think well-rounded is actually so well-rounded. He's kind of just very mediocre and subpar. And like I said, it's a 30% overall win rate. But if I were to take out like my worst characters, like if I take out Streamer, if I take out Fisherman, Chunky, apparently one-armed. I could even like remove like well-rounded and stuff, but it doesn't look as bad. Like 43% is a little more respectable. It's still not like anything, I guess, to write home about, but it does show that if I could shore up the weaknesses on my weakest characters, that could be a nice way to get win rate. Or alternatively, I could just not spam the bad characters and get my win rate up as well. So, that's why I take the overall win rate with a bit of a grain of salt. And then down here, I just looked at the wave stats. Now, obviously, with wins, only 20 will ever have a win. I should also mention I didn't do like endless runs at all in this subset. I don't really find endless that fun, but maybe eventually I have some of those as well. But if I sort by losses, I think we do get some interesting data here. Wave 11 has the most losses at 25, and 8 isn't that far behind at 22, and then 14, 7, 10 kind of trails off after that. But it is interesting to see where the actual difficult points for me are. And this, by the way, things like this are the things I'd really be interested in analyzing other people's data on. Because, this probably has a lot to do with playstyle, but who knows? Maybe these are just objectively harder waves, It'd be interesting to see other people's data on this. So again, if I could plug it, please enable that mod. And when you have maybe 100 runs or so, feel free to send them my way. I'll give you this report back as my thanks. And then eventually I could maybe do a video on like I won't like call out any individual players. I'm just gonna like say, hey, here's the giant group of data here, and we'll analyze it in a future video if if people end up sending them in. But yeah, it's interesting because Wave 11. I don't know that Wave 11 specifically um, has anything about it that's hard, other than it's the first wave that an elite can show up in. And the earlier you find an elite, I find it's typically just the harder to deal with it, right? If you have to face a Wave 11 elite, you're by far most likely to not have your survivability by that point, because you have to focus on offense early typically. So isn't necessarily surprising to me that this is the distribution here. I guess Wave 8, that doesn't surprise me. I really suck at Wave 8. That's when the tanks that can, like, the Horned Warrior tanks that can, like, charge at you and they never die and they do a million damage because they just sit on you. And there's not really invulnerability frames in this game. There are, but there really aren't, And yeah, it's a sucky wave. 14, I believe, is the one where those blobs that split apart and turn into the dudes that shoot bullets all over the map. I'm pretty sure that's wave 14, so it's also not that surprising that that one's pretty tough. 7 is interesting. I had actually expected 7 to be higher, but 7 is the one where those eggs spawn, and if you don't get to them, or if they literally spawn so far apart that it's impossible to get to them, they'll turn into the giant health thing that can cut you. So that's 7. Still pretty high though, right? And then 10, I was a little surprised that 10 was so hard. I would have thought 9 would be harder than 10. 9, they just throw a ton of enemies at you, and that can sometimes catch you by surprise if you have no AoE. But 10, I don't know, it's just kind of a random wave. I mean, I guess it has those tanks in it that love to charge, so that's probably... It's too bad that it didn't record like which enemy ended up killing you. I can find out which elite killed me because I have a way to do that, but I can't find out if it's like, oh, did a Horned Warrior kill me or something? You know what I mean? And there weren't any waves where I had also suspected maybe there would be like a wave where I never lost, but that also was not the case. The lowest amount of losses I had are Wave 18, which is very interesting. Wave 18 you can technically face an elite on, but it just turns out that regardless of that, whether there's an elite or not, just tends to be harder to lose there. And granted, just by nature of things, the wave being higher is going to account for less losses probably, but it is very interesting. We have something as late as wave 14 that accounts for 18 losses, yet, maybe the wave right after it only accounts for 4, which is not too surprising. I mean, when I think of wave 14 and 15, it's like 15 is basically just 14. Maybe, so if you got through 14, you're probably getting through 15. So there's no real surprises there. It's just interesting to see that data being different. It is also interesting that once I get to wave 20, it seems like I usually win. I didn't necessarily expect that, to be honest. I've always thought that they can often be easy, but there are some builds that really rely on enemies being on the map, and wave 20 just doesn't have a lot of enemies on the map, which can be tough. Like say your sustain comes from like picking up materials, something like that. That can be tough, but for what it's worth, I was 76 on wave 20, so that's a lot higher than I expected. So that is that data set. Now we'll go to the next one. Elites. Now I will say, of all the data that I looked at, this one was the least surprising to me. And in fact, I would say the only thing surprising to me about this was the fact that it was so unsurprising. Because usually I have assumptions about things in these type of games. And I'm almost always proven wrong, or at least to some degree wrong. But when I saw this data, I was like, holy crap, this is like exactly how I feel about elites. Like spot on. Maybe the only thing that I was slightly surprised by was Rhino. was a little bit harder than I thought it might have been, but definitely not surprised to see the stupid Croc as my lowest win rate here. You'll notice 20 wins, 13 losses, 60% win rate. By far my worst elite. I still say by far the worst elite, but there does seem to be contention on that. And again, this would be a great one. I would love to see people send their data in on this, because when I look around, usually Butcher and Mom are the other two that get talked about as being worse than Croc. I see Butcher quite a lot. A lot of people say Mom. And I've always thought, yeah, they're definitely, like, these are the big three in my eyes: Croc, Mom, and Butcher. If you get either of them, that's annoying. And any of the other elites don't seem to be that bad in a general sense. But as I can see from the data, Rhino's not that far behind Butcher and Mother. But yeah, the Croc. It's also a little bit annoying that, like, it happens to be my worst elite, and it also happens to be the elite I've, like, seen, like, I believe, like, the second most amount of times. I think the only one I've seen more is Colossus. And then by far the easiest elite for me is the one that I, of course, have seen the least, which is Demon. Only lost once to that. I mean, that's pretty damning there. Monk also, I mean, it's definitely not surprising to me that either of them have incredible win rates. Also Horde. Horde is not technically an elite, but I did want to capture it. And, you know, obviously I'm going to face it a lot more, because a Horde is a Horde, and an elite is an elite. Horde is just always Horde. But for what it's worth, 90 and 9 shows there's a pretty clear difference here between if you get one of these easier things, like an easier elite or a Horde, versus like a Croc. And that, as I mentioned earlier, with like Jack and stuff, you know, that ties back into, like, there's a lot of RNG that happens in a run, technically. And I think if you're good enough, you can overcome all of that with skill. I just am not that good. but what I will say is, you know, beyond items, beyond level ups and all of that, there's also just the RNG of elites. It's like, if I run into Croc on a run, theoretically, I know this isn't a one-to-one truth statement here, but theoretically, you know, it's the difference between having a 60% chance to beat it versus, say, like a 95% chance to beat it, right? For me. So, you know, and again, a lot of this comes down to play style, but for what it's worth, it's pretty damning here that I lose to Croc so much more than the others. Now, maybe that just means I need to get better at fighting Croc. Maybe that just means Croc simply is harder. Probably a little bit of both, honestly, but we'll see. And you never know. You never know. Maybe one day Croc ends up not being my worst. I'm not saying it's impossible. And now we go to items. This one, we'll just call it a rough draft for now, because there's so much ways you could look at this data, and I'm only going to really be looking at it a few ways, and I do want to improve upon it, but I can't do it with the way the data is right now. But with how much I had to learn about Godot, however you call it, and just how Brotato is coded, I should theoretically be able to, like, kind of expand onto Snazaw's run history mod and have it collect a few extra bits of information. Now, of course, I'll only have that information moving forward, but, you know, tangent aside, we'll just look at what I have here. So there's 3 different ways I'm looking at the items right now. The first one is just, did I win or lose if the item was included? Now, that doesn't really take into account if the item had multiples of it, you know. So, you know, say I have 5 coffees versus 1 coffee, they're kind of just counted the same here. So it's not really that flawless of a way to look at it, but I think it's one of the better ways I have to look at it right now, just because it's pretty hard to put together something that gives me data that isn't, like, massively granular, but also, like, somewhat useful to me. So the first one we'll look at is this. So like I said, it's just, if the item was included in the run, did I win the run or did I lose the run? So, oh, just a little bit of technical difficulties, don't mind me. Um, so we'll go by overall wins first. Now, win rate, I'm not gonna say it's completely not worth looking at, but what I will say here is when I look at the win rates, I think, okay, my overall win rate is like, uh, let's make sure I don't have any good, sorry, I make sure I didn't have any characters filtered out there. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so my overall win rate was like 29%, right? So if I see something that I take a lot and is above that 29% win rate, then I know that it's a good item to be taking. Um, that's my that's what I'm drawing conclusions here when I'm sorting my wins and then also looking at the win rate. So Broken Mouth, and I'll have a video on this as well. That's probably an easier to digest video, but I do want to like go through eventually and say like what my top 5 favorite items at each tier are. So like Broken Mouth and Coffee and Tree are absolutely going in there. For example, you can tell that I pick them pretty much every time I see them, and the win rate isn't like massively high, but considering how often I pick them, they definitely seem to have a positive effect on the win rate. Same with like Glasses. I think Glasses is pretty underrated. Leather Vest. Now we start getting to the tier 2 items. Now, simply by nature of being a tier 2 item, you're going to have a higher win rate because that means you made it further in the run. So there is that, but um, you know, uh, that it's hard to say exactly how much that changes the win rate, but for what it's worth, I can see that Leather Vest and Lure do quite well. 62 and 67% win rates here. Dangerous Bunny also 53. Baby Gecko, it's another item I like quite a lot. 42, not too bad. Banner 57. Coupon 44. We can keep going down here. I mean, there's so many items in the game. I'd like to give most of them at least some viewing here, right? Spicy sauce, it's an item I like a lot, but we will say, of the tier 2 items so far, it does have a little bit lower of a win rate than the other ones. Banner 57, Dangerous Bunny 53. But not too bad. I mean, I think it's pretty unanimously agreed upon that Dangerous Bunny is pretty good. But 53 versus 51 is not gigantically different. I still think Spicy Sauce is a little underrated, but it's probably not as good as I give it credit for. Lumberjack shirt, metal plate, Lost Duck. Now, interestingly, Lost Duck, of the tier 1 items I've listed so far, kind of has a little bit lower of a win rate. Same with Bag. Bag's a pretty interesting one. I've always assumed Bag is like really good, but it is worth saying it's not that much higher than my overall win rate. But I will still say that it is positive. As long as it's above 29, that I know it doesn't, at the very least, it doesn't seem to have a negative effect on my win rate. Tentacle, I really like Tentacle. Blindfold, love me some Blindfold. Lemonade, Garden, love me Garden. Cyclops Worm, and some of these, they have a pretty high win rate. It's also like something that I could reconsider, because I've always thought about Cyclops Worm, and it's hard for me to evaluate if it's a good item or not. And I think I don't take it as much as I probably should. And what I can see here is it does seem to have a decent effect on the win rate. I mean, 62%. It's probably worth me taking a little bit more. Propeller Hat actually having a higher win rate than Lucky Duck. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That could just be variance. Cake is definitely a good one. Bait. Now, Bait is getting unfairly judged here. If I want to real quick look at Bait differently, we could simply remove Fisherman, because as we've determined, my Fisherman stats aren't so hot. So if I remove Fisherman, does that change Bait that much? We'll just sort alphabetically and just see. So Bait, before it was pretty lower win rate, but 43, not too bad. Still not amazing though, honestly. Like I always thought it's a pretty cost efficient item, but I will say more often than you'd probably remember, those lampreys do end up kind of killing you. Even if they don't outright kill you, they might take half your health off, and then you just can't replenish it in time, and then die. Let's put fisherman back in. I want the full Monty here of stats. So go back to sorting by wins. I think we're on, yeah, this one. Adrenaline. I think this is the first tier 3 item that showed up in our lists, and it is very good win rate, 82%. And I've always thought that it's an incredible item. It doesn't surprise me that much that the win rate is 82%. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was even higher, but I pretty much always take it if I have any dodge at all. And there are enough runs where I take it probably too early, where I might lose. Recycling machine, poisonous tonic. That's also a tier 3 item. Not quite as high of a win rate as adrenaline, but still seems decent. I do quite enjoy poisonous tonic. Cute monkey. That's the one that heals you when you get materials picked up. Fertilizer, I would have expected fertilizer to be a bit better. That's the tier 1 item that loses you 1 melee damage but gains you 8 harvest. Granted, I will say, there's context here, right? I mean, I wouldn't be buying fertilizer later in a run, or maybe even taking it later in a run, even if it's free. But so by nature of that, I'm usually going to be buying it early or picking it up early. But for what it's worth, 32% is definitely low. It's getting close to that 29% mark where it's like, is this really having a super good effect on my win rate? Maybe. Wandering Bot, 58%. Now, I would have thought Wandering Bot was a little bit higher. For tier 3, it maybe isn't that high of a win rate, but I take it a lot as well. There's the context of that as well. It's like, hey, I'll take it on a losing run a lot of the time, and it may or may not be enough to pull me out of a losing run. But for what it's worth, I don't know. I still think 58% is pretty good, even if it's a tier 3. Fairy, I expected Fairy to be a little higher because I don't think HP regen is that good of a stat, but Fairy is like stupidly good at giving you HP regen. And I mean, I will say it's still really good. It just speaks volumes to the item that I thought it would be higher than 61. But I mean, 61 is still one of the higher win rates out there of my stuff with significant amounts of wins. Shitty Potion, Gentle Alien. I was hoping to see, honestly, different stats on Gentle Alien because like 43 is just pretty decent, right? I was kind of hoping to see that I had been undervaluing it a bunch and they had have like a really high win rate, or I was alternatively wanting to see that it just had like a horrible win rate. Unfortunately, it just had like a pretty okay win rate. It just seems like an okay item to take, but it's not like a game winner. I don't think. I think if it were a game winner, you would see a different effect on the win rate. Hedgehog 40, Baby Elephant, Cyberball. Cyberball has been putting in work, but we're gonna talk about luck later. Luck will get its own little spiel. Dynamite, and so on and so forth. Sharp Bullet is another one I thought maybe would have a really high effect on the win rate, but it didn't really. 43. It's similar to like Gentle Alien even. White Flag actually is okay. I mean, I've had mixed feelings on both White Flag and Gentle Alien. I will say though, the general public seems to love the absolute shit out of Gentle Alien, and similarly they seem to hate the hell out of White Flag. But I will say, even though it's a tier 2 item versus the tier 1 thing, I don't think there's much of a difference between their win rates, and I've taken White Flag a significant amount of times as well. So I personally think White Flag is pretty underrated, but it's obviously not an amazing item. I think there's context here too, though, because it's like if I'm taking White Flag, the run is like probably not in an amazing state. And in the context of that, I think 50% win rate with 50 times that I took it is pretty good personally. Because, like I said, the context usually is that I wasn't in a good spot on that run anyway. So the fact that it probably might have helped me get pulled out of that speaks volumes to that item, I think. And then wings. Wings is amazing. I always love me some wings. Alien eyes. That now this one doesn't really surprise me. I've noticed like alien eyes. Obviously, it only works well if you're going high on HP, but typically I will want to go high on HP. And for tier two items, 64, pretty good percent win. Alien magic, another item that I think is pretty underrated. That's a tier three item that gives you a bunch of HP for giving the enemy move speed. I mean, 24 and 9, it clearly can't be that bad for you. 72% win rate's one of the higher win rates I've seen so far on our tier 3 items. Clover looks like it edges out a little bit with a similar pick rate. I mean, just compare that. Clover is pretty agreed upon as a pretty good item, right? Gives you dodge, gives you life steal, or removes your life steal, but gives you a bunch of luck. The community support. This was a little surprising to me. I would have thought that this one had a massively good effect on the win rate, but it actually isn't super special for a tier 3 item. 57%. Still good. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a bad item, but it's not having the positive effect that something like Alien Magic or even Clover has, right? 57 is a little bit lower. And then Finn, I do like Finn as well. You lose some luck to gain some lifesteal and some speed. I think that's a good trade-off, especially because I'm not so convinced luck is that good of a stat. I think it's kind of overrated, but we'll get to that later. Ugly Tooth. This is another one I think I go back and forth on. I still think the stats here show that it's decent, but it doesn't show that it's amazing, I feel. I don't know. I think that I think losing the speed is often not worth it. Your own speed just to reduce enemy speed, even if you do reduce their speed a lot. Then Alien Tongue. That is that technically the highest win percentage tier 1 item, but the context there is you're obviously taking it on a character that might not care about the consumables, or might just want that HP. Plant. It is interesting that plant in comparison is actually less good. I would have thought plant is pretty good, but I mean it's still good. 42% is fine. But Alien Tongue, for what it's worth, of the significantly picked tier 1 items so far, it actually has the highest win rate, though I think I would still rank these ones higher. I mean, Tree picked quite a lot, has a 49% win rate. That might have my actual vote for number 1 tier 1 item, but I don't know. Coffee and Broken, or what is it called? Broken Mouth. I always call it Big Mouth because it really looks like a big mouth. Improved tools, interesting one. I've always been taking it. It seems to be pretty good. It just gives 10% attack speed with no downside, and I am almost never able to cash in on its engineering effect. It like never shows up when I go engineering, it feels, but shows up all the time when I'm not going engineering, which is most of the time. And I don't know, 10% attack speed, even though it's I believe a tier 3 item, with no downside. I mean, it's a tier 2 upgrade, or a tier 2 level up upgrade for attack speed for free, or for no downside. I mean, that's okay. Doesn't necessarily surprise me that that's 65% win rate. Mastery 60. Mastery is obviously a good item. Pumpkin, Alien Baby. Did I get my stuff mixed up? I think I got my stuff mixed up. Alien Baby is the one I was talking about. What was the other one? Alien Magic. I don't remember the difference between Alien Magic. Well, one thing's for sure. Whatever is the case, Alien Magic seems to be the really good at 72%. Alien Baby is 59. I'm pretty sure Alien Baby is the one that I thought Alien Magic was. Let's look really quick. Where is the Alien magic. I feel like nothing is. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's. Sorry, I misspoke. 8 HP, 3 HP regen, minus 8 luck. That's the one that has 72% win rate. Which again, I like it. I will say this one's underrated too, because as I've said, I think luck is overrated. I think people don't take this much because of the luck, but a 72% win rate does speak for itself. And I guess Alien Baby, um, this is the one I was thinking of. Still, though, 59% win rate still seems like it's pretty takeable, but clearly not as good as the Alien Magic. 15 health and then plus 8% enemy move speed. It is what it is. I still think it's a pretty good item. I think. But not as good as a lot of the other tier 3s, clearly it seems. Defective steroids. See, now we're getting into the part where I may not remember the names of a lot of these, and I think defective steroids is just a tier 1 item that gives you damage at the cost of health, if I remember correctly, and it actually has a pretty good win rate. But the context there is, I don't think I would ever take that early in a run, because I just don't think trading off HP for percent damage ever makes sense early. But I can see it making sense later, so I feel like that's just a byproduct of the fact that I'm taking it later in a run, that it has such a high win rate. But that's just an assumption. One thing I've learned with working with data is unless you really dig in, I never give a 100% statement on that. That's just like a thought that I have about it. But it could very well be that it might just be a good item. And by the way, this is a bit of data that isn't currently captured that I am gonna try to modify the mod to capture, and that is which wave did I get it on? I think that would be pretty useful to look at, particularly, and I apologize, I can't remember the Discord user that had suggested it, but it's a great suggestion to basically look at when I get an item within the first 5 waves, for example. Does it have a really nice positive effect on my win rates? That would be really interesting to see. But we can't get that right now with the way that the data is recorded, so that's something for a future iteration of this. Whetstone, Silver Bowler, yeah, and you know, there's probably too many to go through at this point, but I will just slowly scroll through them. Well, not that slowly, but I'll scroll through all of them here, just in case you are curious about how I do with any of the particular items, and then you can just kind of pause the video and go back to it. One other thing I do want to look at here, though, is, you know, we looked at the wins. I also want to look at maybe not even the losses, but just we'll look at we'll look at the actual win rate. You know, a lot of these items I'm just not taking that often, or they're not showing up that often. Probably red items, for example. But it is interesting that Glass Cannon, that's a tier 3 purple item, 9-0. Now, I believe as Lukewarm Toaster brought up a good point, like this could just be an artifact of me only taking that item when I feel pretty confident in a run, and that could very well be the case, and that's probably why 9-0, but it is worth considering that maybe I should take Glass Cannon more. Because, I mean, 9-0, that's pretty good. It's an item I typically shy away from. I wouldn't be opposed to taking it. It just doesn't seem like, you know, giving up 3 armor, that's like 3rd tier level up of armor, which is a stat you pretty much always want, for 25% damage. It just seemed like that trade-off isn't typically worth it, but it's hard to deny 9-0. It's definitely an item I might reach a little bit more on just to see if it performs well in a run where maybe I, you know, might not have normally taken it. And the only other one here with 100% win rate that's probably has a somewhat significant amount of data is Night Goggles. I think that's a really good item, and if it at all makes sense for me to take it, I usually take it. And then we get down, probably just, yeah, a lot of red and purple items. I mean, Anvil does really well. Rip and Tear, really good. Robot Arm, just a lot of armor usually. I rarely ever care about the other stuff, but, or Exoskeleton, same idea really. Alloy, Focus, Sif's Relic. This is another one I think is really underrated. A lot of people don't like Baby Gecko or Sif's Relic, and um, I think I think it's pretty good. I mean, you have to you have to imagine every shop is less expensive than the next shop, and in a way, this relic in my or this item in my opinion pays for itself and then some. It's I see it as an economy relic, but even beyond that, it just has visually, the intangible effect of it here is that visually it cleans the screen up and it just makes it easier for me because there's less stuff going on, uh, and I can just work pretty well with that. Adrenaline, I believe we've already addressed adrenaline. Adrenaline, I will say though, to me is the number one performing item here, just in terms of pick rate versus win rate. I really think adrenaline is contender for best item in the game, and I think that I think we have some pretty good support for it. But who knows? Maybe glass cannon is the best item in the game. I'll just have to take it more and see. Because adrenaline is something that I'll basically always take, whereas glass cannon isn't. What if I just start treating glass cannon the same, and does it end up approaching an 82% win rate? We'll have to see. Yeah, so on and so forth here. Bandana, another good item. Adding piercing with 10% overall damage downgrade is actually pretty good. Jetpack's great. Giant belt is supposedly great. Sometimes it actually feels underwhelming to me, but I won't deny that it does a lot of damage. Stone skin, warrior helmet. It is nice for me to see some of these too, because it's like warrior helmet. That's another item I'm always like kind of iffy on. I'm like, is this really worth it? But I don't know. I mean, 75% win rate, pretty decent pick rate. It does seem to be pretty good. It does seem to be pretty good. How did we not talk about item warrior helmet? Yeah, we should have seen it. For whatever reason, I just passed over it. But yeah, whatever. Mouse does pretty good. I feel like the thing that I like with Mouse versus Gentle Alien is that the accompanying 5% lifesteal is a lot better than the accompanying stuff that Gentle Alien has. Cape is nice. But yeah, what if we look at the other way? What if we look at the bad win rate? Well, the only 0% win rate is Barricade, apparently. I only took it once, though, for what it's worth. Pretty interesting one here, though. Item, the Tractor. I've always assumed Tractor was a pretty good item, and I would own. It's not like I would take this. Well, let's put. I mean, it's pretty bad. One in 14 here. I'm willing to not necessarily blame Tractor though. Like I don't know what was going on in these runs. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that Tractor would be so bad. I mean, if we look at it here, I mean, I will say it is purple, so it can cost a bit if I buy it. But like 8% damage is not that bad of a downside. And 40 harvesting is a ton, but I don't know. Maybe it's just too late in the game for harvesting to be relevant. And I guess, 8% damage is 8% damage. Maybe it is not that good of an item. Maybe it's overrated. Now, this is another instance where I would love to see other people's run data and see if it lines up with mine here. Because conceptually, I can't really tell you why Tractor did so bad. Whereas, like Boxing Glove, there's no surprises here. So I think this is potentially the worst item in the game. Personally, I think is Boxing Glove. Like it just doesn't do anything. Um, it really just doesn't. So it's not that surprising to me that it's like 16% win rate. And Weird Ghost also not that surprising. This stupid ass item has baited me into so many pointless losses when I should have just not done it. It's just not worth it. I mean, the risk associated with it does not even remotely Uh, it's 3 HP. It's like the lowest amount of HP you can gain anyway from any item. Yet the downside is just massive, and the only upside is that it's cheap. But it's not even that much cheaper than the other, like a cake or a broken mouth. You would just rather take a cake and a broken mouth. Like Weird Ghost, I could probably really take it a lot less, I would say. And then we get to like some of these, it's just like, I don't know that campfire or eye surgery or snake or landmine are bad. It's just that the thing you'll notice with all of these is their engineering and elemental, which I just think are significantly worse than doing a ranged or a melee build. Um, I just don't see any point. Every time there's some exceptions, but I'm usually disappointed in in just elemental and engineering. I don't think that they seem to have any advantage over melee and range, but I know some people really like them. So again, this would be very interesting to see for me to see other people's data on. But for what it's worth, I just have horrible win rates with all of these. But that could also be that I don't necessarily have great win rates with a lot of the engineering and elemental characters. Streamer, for example, one of the only characters that I will play engineering on. I only play engineering on the characters I'm forced to do it on, and for what it's worth, I played Streamer a lot more than the other engineering based characters. The other engineering based characters are actually pretty good, I would say. Entrepreneur, engineer, those are good characters. And Acid, it doesn't surprise me that much that Acid sucks. I think this item is one of the worst items in the game, potentially the worst tier 2 item in the game. 8 health is just not worth the amount of dodge you're losing. It's almost like an even trade off, and it only is going to be okay, I think, if you're just completely ditching dodge. But I think that it's a bad idea to ditch dodge. I know that a lot of guides I've seen around really seem to say that all you need is armor and health, and maybe that's true for them, but it's not true for me. And I'll show you the data to really back that up in a bit here. But yeah, so for what it's worth, these are just we're now above. There's only really one page of items that has a significant lower effect on my win rate. Because remember, my win rate was like 29% overall. So anything here is like above, so it's doing all right, even if it doesn't seem that stellar. Um, yeah, flame turret sucks, etc., etc. And then the other way I could look at it, and I'm not going to go through everything now that we've kind of already this was the main thing I was going to look with items, but another way I could look at it is I could basically say, this item, say say I have like 5 coffees, right? In this output, I'm going to count that as 5 wins for coffee. Or if I have 5 coffees and I lost, I'm going to count it as 5 losses for coffee, etc., etc. Not a really great way to look at things, but I was interested just to see, like, what items, what this tells me, I guess. And I think eventually I could figure out a better way to output what I'm trying to look for here. But what I'm trying to look for here is like, what are the items where when I take a lot of them, it seems to like be good for me. But I don't think that's what I'm actually accomplishing here. But for what it's worth, we see the items that I tend to take multiples of, right? Like coffee, I'll take every time I see it. Broken mouth, I pretty much take every time I see it. Tree, I take every time I see it. And you'll see the win rate when I look at it that way is actually a little bit better on these tier 1 items, right? Because now it's like when I win, I had a ton of coffees and so on and so forth. Then glasses actually falls a little bit behind there, but still like pretty good. Lure ends up doing pretty good. You take multiple lures. Coupon, same thing. Enter, so on and so forth. And then we can similarly look at it, this way. Mushroom, all that stuff. We could look at it the other way. Really not many changes here. When we look at the bad win rate, it's the same. It's the same stuff. Bait comes in worse because, as I said, I'll have a ton of baits with fishermen, and since I'm typically losing with fishermen, it's going to come in pretty low there. And then the other thing, I didn't know a good way to name this, but I just said like contribution score. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically just saying, and I do count if there's multiples here, but I'm basically just saying, in the run, if it was a win, uh, I'm basically saying this item, however many times I had it, we'll divide it by the overall number of items. And that's going to be like your score if I get a win or a loss. So, say, if I were to use a really simple example, say that I had 5 coffees and I only had 10 items total, I'm going to get a 0.5 on a win score there. Or if I get a loss, I would get a 0.5 on a loss score there. Or let's say I just had 1 acid and out of my 10 items, I would get a 0.1 on my win score for acid or a 0.1 on the loss if I lost. I don't know if that makes sense, but if it does, we can really quick just look at what comes in there. Now, bait comes in the highest on the win score just by nature of the fact that I took so many of them, right, because of Fisher. But what we do see is the loss score comes in gigantic here. So really what can be kind of useful here is to look at the score diff. So if I sort by positive here, we can see when I take an item a lot, does it have a good effect on my rate? And I think this accomplishes what I'm trying to look for above a little bit better. So like Poisonous Tonic, for example, I tend to take a lot of these. Adrenaline is interesting because it obviously is a unique item. I can only take it once, but it's so good that it still shows up here. It had like an 80-something% win rate before when I look at it that way. But the win score rate here comes into like 72%. And the win score rate, I don't know if that's like a super useful thing to look at, but that's basically just me taking the win score divided by the loss plus the win score. But score diff here is mainly what I'm looking for. And adrenaline, even though I only have one of it on any given run, still comes in second highest here, but poison tonic does edge it out a little bit because I'll typically take as many poison tonics as I can. And then lure, actually, of the tier 2 items is the top. Warrior helmet also coming in pretty good. Cyclops worm, very interesting because I don't take that item much, right? But it does turn out that when I take it, I tend to take a few of them, and it tends to turn out well. Clover mushroom. This is an item I've been taking a lot more. I used to be shy away from it because I was under the impression that luck was like a really good stat, which I'm not under the impression of anymore, which I guess is definitely hypocritical because I do like Clover a lot. But the difference here is that Clover gives me dodge, so it's giving me something I like along with the luck. Rip and Tear, Exoskeleton. We can look at it. A few of them there, just a few. Power Generator, that's another unique item. And then if we go the other way, obviously bait by far the worst because of fishermen. But other than that, fertilizer, as we talked about before, I didn't think fertilizer was necessarily that bad of an item, but it actually turns out when we look at it this way, it turns out that when I take a lot of them, for whatever reason, it didn't seem to turn out very well for me. You'll see that loss score of 5.2 versus the win score of 0.71 because I still had a positive win rate with it when I just look at it, like if it's included in a run or not. But actually, when I take multiple of them, it almost seems like the more I take, the less good I did. But I don't know how useful that is because it's the same thing with bag here, and like in my mind, I'm like, I can't conceptualize any world where bag is a bad item. Like, it earns you so much money, and yeah, it does cost you 1% speed, but for whatever, for what it's worth, it didn't seem it actually did that well for me. It's so weird too, because like you can just see on the end game screens that that bag earns so much money, but for whatever reason, on the runs that I happened to have bag, it didn't do so hot. And Weird Ghost, we know it is who we thought it was. Baby Gecko, though, that was one I gave some praise to. It's actually not doing so hot when we look at multiples, which is interesting because I always like having multiples. But for what it's worth, it even some of the really good items are coming in here negative. So it's like, how much stock can we give the score diff here necessarily, right? Coffee, coupon, broken mouth, those are obviously really good items, but they're coming in negative here. I think it just by nature of tier one items being so early and losing, it's just going to be hard to make up that score diff. And I knew this page was going to take the longest for us to get through, but that's fine. My voice is still intact somewhat, and we just have like 2 more pages to get through here. Right, the stat analysis. Now, I will apologize in advance. The format here is not great, but I couldn't find a better way to do it. Maybe I'll figure something out. But basically, what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at all the stats that I'm interested in. I didn't really look at any secondary stats, and I didn't want to look at like melee, ranged, elemental, or engineering because those seemed a bit too specific for me. But I could look at them later maybe. But I just looked at the general stats here, and I counted up when the amount of losses and wins and kind of bucketed it per stat range. So like luck here, for example, luck at 0 or below, how many times did it win? If my luck was at 0 below, how many times did I lose? 1 to 50, 51 to 100, 100 to 1 and above. I just sort of picked numbers that seemed interesting to me for each of these stats. They're gonna vary from stat to stat because obviously they're not, the numbers are going to be different. But really, what I'm mainly interested in here, I'm just going to scroll all of them to the right to hopefully make it a little bit easier to read. But what I'm interested in here is the win rates. And I will say, similar to with some of these things, just the fact that the stat got high obviously is going to have a higher win rate because that means I made it pretty late into a run, right? So we're not gonna pretend that fact doesn't exist. And similarly, if the stat is low, that means a lot of those losses could happen early on. As we kind of saw with the waves, really wave 14 and prior are when you're losing anyway, or when I'm losing typically. So just by nature of that, we have to take all of this with a grain of salt. But it is interesting because I think what I am able to see here, especially when I compare across the stats here, like in all of these stats, I'm going to have the first bucket basically be the win rate when the stat is at 0 or below. That's basically telling me if I treat this stat as a dump stat, is that like okay for me to do? Now, we'll look at luck, and when my luck is at 0 or below, I have a 21% win rate, 21.9% win rate. Let's go ahead and round it up to 22, why don't we? But it doesn't seem great when I just look at that, right? When I just look at luck, it's like, okay, well, that's definitely lower than my 29% win rate. However, when I look at other stats, and what they're like when they're dumped, range at 0 or below is like pretty damning, right? 3% win rate, very low. Dodge, 5% win rate, very low. Armor, 1%. Percent damage, 13%. Max HP, that one won't show here because obviously you can't have 0 or less HP, but we could say 1 to 50, 0.9% win rate. Speed 0 below, 8%. Attack speed, 14%. 0 or below. Crit chance, 6% win rate when 0 or below. Harvesting, 28. HP regen. I would have thought this would be one of the ones that was higher, but it's even that is like 14% when I dump it. Lifesteal's at 24. So really, when I look at all of these, there's three that stand out as having the highest win rates when I dump it. That's a 24% win rate for steel, lifesteal, when you dump it. 28% win rate for harvesting when you dump it. And then luck, 21% when you dump it. So to me, uh, that doesn't really tell me that those are the three worst stats. It just tells me that those three stats are dumpable. You can win decently because remember, like I said, um, by nature of losing a run early or even in mid game, I may just have not had a chance to put points into that stat. I'm not necessarily dumping it, right? However, so that's automatically going to keep the win rates low. So I'm not expecting to see anything that is above 29 even, right, for those. But for those three stats, and harvesting actually was almost right at 29. I didn't expect harvesting to be so dumpable, but it turns out it's pretty damn dumpable. But then we also want to see, is there anything else interesting? Like when I get the stat higher, is there a really big win rate increase? So, like with luck, definitely it seems higher once you get to 51 or above 101. It's also interesting that dumping it had a higher win rate than like just kind of limping into it. So luck between 1 to 50, it actually lowered the win rate to 50%, 15%. And then 51 to 100, it's at 58. 101 and above, it's at 68. And then range, I probably should have opened up one more bucket here because I think range typically is, when I think about it, I guess I'm going above 100 quite a lot. Like well above 100, so I probably should have opened up like 151 range to look at. But for what it's worth, as we said, dumping range doesn't seem to work out for me that much, and even limping in like 50 and below is only 11. But once we get above 50, between 50 and 100, it starts to climb a bit, and then above 101, now we're in a decent win rate. So range, which is one of the stats that I see a lot in the guides that I see online, they say that range is like useless. Sure doesn't seem to be useless to me. Seems to me like when I dump it, it's a horrible idea because a 3% win rate's one of my lowest win rates when I dump a stat. And then dodge is similar. This is another one, like I said before, that gets a lot of like hate. But I actually quite enjoy it. I still think I generally like armor better than dodge, but I want both of them. I don't want just one or the other. I think dodge is pretty underrated, and you'll notice some stats here. So like similar with range, dumping it has a horrible win rate, and even limping into it, not much better, 14%. However, once we get to 26 to 50, that's like a significant amount of dodge. Now we're up to 54% rate. And when I'm above 51, keep in mind 60 is your typical max that dodge is allowed to be at for any character. Ghost can get up to 90. And I think one other character can get to like 70 if I remember correctly. I can't remember who it is, but all of that considered, it's a 100% win rate when dodge is at 51 or above. Now, obviously, there is some context here. I usually will lock in defense later than any offense or economy-based stats. So, obviously, the run went pretty far if I made it to then, but it's a 100% win rate, and it's not like it's a low amount. It's 18. 18 of those wins were above 51. So, I don't know. I think that shows that it's a pretty good stat. And similarly, armor. I think this is the lowest of any dump stat. So it's a 1% win rate is when armor's at 0 below is definitely not very good. And that even includes I won with Ghost once or twice in there. So those might be the only wins where armor was 0 or below. And then limping in on it, not incredible, 23%. But then once we get to 11 to 20 armor, now we're up to a 75% win rate. 28 wins there, and then 100% win rate if I can get above 21. 11 of those were there. So armor similar to dodge is like really good. But again, it's like there's probably, you don't necessarily want to draw conclusions here where it's like, oh, I'm just going to only take dodge and armor now, right? You really do need to have damage locked in, I think, before these are locked in. So it's like I said, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt. There is a progression that happens in this game, but I don't know. I would say that I'd be willing to go in on dodge and armor maybe a little sooner than I typically do, just seeing this data here. Something I could play around with. Then we have percent damage. Somewhat dumpable. I mean, 13. It's better than these like armor, dodge, and range, but it's still like not great. Limping in on it, 29%. I would have, and to be honest, I would have thought that percent damage is actually okay to limp in at, but it does turn out we actually only see a significant increase once you get to 51 to 100. Very interesting here that, and I know what's going on here, I think. And I would expect we see the same thing when we get to attack speed. But you'll actually notice that damage above 101 is 43% versus a 76% when it's between 51 and 100. And I'm pretty sure that's because there's characters that just have giant percent damage increases that I tended to lose with a few times, one-armed being one of them. And we'll see the same thing with attack speed. So that's, again, just wonky data. And what I could do, I don't really want to do it because it'll reload the page, but I could remove one-armed from these stats if I really wanted to. Then HP, like we said, definitely not a stat that you want to dump. It actually has even lower than armor. It's under 1%, 0.9% win rate when your HP is between 1 and 50. Once you get it above there, it's significantly better, up to 41. If you can get it to 101 to 150, you're at 75. And if you get above 151, it's 100. However, what I will say is we did only have 6 wins above that. So I typically just am not able to get above 151. But, you know, that sweet spot of 101 to 150 certainly seems to be a good goal to shoot for on a run. And then speed, it doesn't surprise me that dumping it typically didn't work out because it's one of the big reasons that I don't do well with chunky, right? Speed is very necessary to beat elites, and you kind of see that limping in at 1 to 10 is also just not very high at all. It's almost as bad as not having any at all. 10% win rate. But then once you get from 11 to 20, you know, keep in mind, we're talking about the same range here, right? We're talking about a 9% spread here. 1% to 10 is a 10% win rate. We up it from 11 to 20, and now it's all of a sudden a 57% win rate. So I think definitely getting up above closer to 20 is what you should shoot for. And then if you can get above 20, it's even better, 65% win rate. And then the attack speed, this one's going to look wonky, but you know, dumping it grants a 14% win rate. I would have thought that would have been worse, honestly. I think attack speed is just something every single build wants, and I can't even think of too many runs where I would have not had any attack speed. Like, but apparently, yeah, 8 and 46 when I had, and that's a significant amount of runs that I just didn't have any attack speed. So for whatever reason, they ended up there, and they didn't do too well. But then once you get, it actually gets worse, I guess, between 1 to 50. That's still like kind of limping into it, right? But then once we get from 51 to 100. Now we start to see a big increase. It's up to 56%. You're basically getting close to doubling your damage once you get to there. Plus, you're doubling like your lifesteal percent chance. You're doubling a lot of things. You're doubling your crit frequency and stuff like that. And then when you get it to 150 or 101 to 150, it's 94%. That's pretty good, and that's 16 and 1 in that range. So not a huge sample size, but still enough to show that it was pretty good in that range. And then, like I said, we have the wonkiness of my one-armed losses here, because when your attack speed is 151 and above, it drops drastically to 21%. And granted, that's all one-armed, right? Because one-armed starts with like 200% attack speed. And then crit chance. Crit chance is a very interesting one, and it's one that I think gave me some pretty good insight. So crit chance 0 below is 6%, pretty low. You definitely now this one's another interesting one, because a lot of the guides I've seen, they'll say like, well, crit is definitely good, but it's optional, right? Like it's one that you can get by on dumping. But that really doesn't seem to be the case here for me, right? Like 6% is just a horrible win rate when I dump it. And then even if I limp in on it, it's like 19%, pretty low. But then like I get above 25% or a crit here, even below 50, and we're looking at 71% win rate, 27 and 11. So a pretty good sample size. So crit actually seems to be pretty good stat that probably every run should have. And then 51 or above is 100% win rate, 19 and 0. Also a significant amount of sample size there, I would say, for what I'm working with. And yeah, I would say stat-wise, this one surprised me the most, because I didn't really know what to think about crit. Because like I said, most of the guides said, you don't really need it. It seems like you need it. That's what I would say here. It seems like it's a pretty good stat. So I'll play around with crit more. And then harvesting, the most dumpable stat apparently. And even limping in on it seems to be even worse. That kind of, I guess, lines up with what we saw with the fertilizer, but I don't know. I don't know what's up with harvesting, but for what it's worth, there definitely seems to be a tipping point where, I guess, above 100 it's really good. If you can get above 150, even better. Problem is, I feel like the only thing going on, the sample sizes aren't big there. It's like 4 for 151 and above. Or sorry, 14 and 4. I guess it's okay, but and then 10 and 9. So part of me wants to say that that's just simply because the run went later. But I don't know. I couldn't glean much from harvesting, because like in my mind I feel like harvesting is a pretty good stat, but it doesn't seem. Let's put it this way: of the harvesting related items, and now harvesting as a stat, I've seen nothing in the data to lead me to believe harvesting is actually that good, even though it always feels good. The data actually says otherwise. And I guess that makes sense. It's like, well, if I'm putting these resources in like now just to get resources later, often I may only be like I may not be killing as many enemies, so like I may just lose materials there. But that aside, it's also just like, how much extra do I make, right? Do I make enough that it just justified not buying some actual stats there? And I don't know. I've been playing around lately with just not using luck, since I've been pretty unimpressed with it. But I may have to start playing around with just not doing harvesting as well. Like, I would be interested, unless it's like thrown at me. That's basically the way I've been treating luck. Is like, if it's thrown in my face, I'll take it. Otherwise, I don't need it. And I'm kind of feeling that way with harvesting now. It'll be interesting. I will try to take the same approach with harvesting, and we'll see if I have much differences. Then the final two stats we have are HP regen. Like I said, I thought HP regen seemed like the most dumpable stat in the world to me, but it's kind of middle of the road as far as our dump stat win rates go. And limping in on it seems even okay. I mean, 1 to 10, 32 of the like limp in buckets. It's actually pretty okay. And then even on the next few buckets here, 11 to 20, and then 21 and above, pretty high win rates. Granted, I don't have a whole lot of 21 and above, only 10 and 1, but or even the other one, it's like 13 and 4 with the other one, but so the majority are happening, I guess, as dumps, but you know, if I look at the actual totals here, by far, I tend to dump HP regen in most runs, as you can see here. 140 of my 240 runs. So, like, over 50% of them, I believe, I dump the stat. However, maybe that's not such a good idea. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that because it's like a 14% win rate. And then lifesteal. Lifesteal surprisingly seems to be pretty dumpable. And I have a pretty good sample size on dumped lifesteal runs. That being said, if you can get it above 21, it seems good. But again, probably just the run went late at that point. 13 and 4. Who knows, right? This one kind of combos in with range to a certain degree, so I could probably look at that and dig in further to see like how it correlates with ranged builds, but I didn't really have the time, and it took you know it took a lot of time to even figure out how to get this working. Honestly, there's I've done 3 different games now where I've done these data dives on. So I've done it for Slay the Spire, I've done it for Monster Train, and now I'm doing it for Brotato. And uh, in that order, the games have been progressively harder for me to actually get data on. Like the amount of hoops I have to jump through to get this stuff is pretty wild. I mean, like I said, I had to decompile Brotato. I had to have a mod that a modder made, and then I had to like write my own mod, my own custom mod to basically get what I'm getting here. So I can only do so much, but I do plan on doing more. And then we have weapons. I saved this one for last because I felt it didn't give me any real insight on anything, to be honest. But for what it's worth, we'll briefly go over them. So, oh, and I'm looking at Steam. Make sure I was looking at everything. Yeah. Okay, that's better. I don't know why that one was looking at Steam Deck. Um, all right, so no weapons. That's gonna be Bull. We all know Bull. Bull is nice. 100% win rate, 2-0. Best character in the game, clearly. But so the first way I'm looking at this, I don't know why I called it splayed out, but this is the same way. If I looked at it this way, where I'm basically saying, if I say I have a stick and I have 5 of them, that'll count me 5 wins. If I have 5 of them and I lose, it counts me 5 losses. So it's not like super interesting here. In fact, I don't even know that it's worth looking over. I guess we could, but yeah, I mean, flamethrower. Apparently, I don't find flamethrower that much. That seems weird. I guess I found that one a lot in the olden days, shall we say. Maybe just not in the latest set. Laser gun. Yeah, I just don't think this is that useful. But for what it's worth, you can see all of them here. Feel free to pause the video, but I don't think looking at the the weapons this way is like useful at all. I don't even know why I did it, but the other way I can look at them. And by the way, in the data, it does say the level that the weapon was at, but I ended up just collapsing them down because I didn't seem interesting to me to actually see what the level of the weapon was. You know, tier one, tier all the way on to tier four. Because it just the data gets too granular. It's already hard to draw much insight as the data stands. How I have it, it's even less when I start dividing them out by like what level the weapon is. Um, so at least we see here what we kind of expect to see. At least it's the same 70 and 170. Number as before. The win rate's the same, but what we see here is I see the full set of weapons that I have on a given run. The problem is it's still like pretty granular because different weapon combinations can make this like very the cardinality can be very high. So as I sort by wins, for example, it's like I only have 5 as the highest that I can even find for a weapon set. And surprise, surprise, we saw 5 wins with Doctor. These are probably, my guess is 4 of them are with Doctor because I know I won one of them with Scissors, and probably the other one is Lich because I do like to run medical gun with Lich. Then Slingshot. Problem with Slingshot, this, and I could again start removing characters, but it's like I know a lot of the Slingshot losses were from Fishermen. That being said, I've been few of my runs lately. I've been a little unimpressed with Slingshot. I do wonder if I overrate it a little bit, but for what it's worth, it didn't have very good win rate. But yeah, even the problem here again is like it just makes the data so granular that it's tough. Okay, I don't know what's up with that. I kind of questioned this. Oh, right. Because I was doing a bunch of hunter runs, and I think the ones where I won, I always had like a sniper rifle or something. That's probably what's going on there. Yeah, as you can see, sometimes, if another weapon sneaks in there, that'll get included here. But then probably the most useful way to look at this is similar to what we do with the items, where we give it a contribution score. So, like in this example, where this set of weapons resulted in a loss, we have 5 shotguns and 1 SMG. So, in that case, I would give the SMG just a 1 out of 6 for the loss score, but the double barrel shotgun, I'd give a 5 out of 6 for the loss score, whatever that comes out to in the decimal. And then I just sum those all up. So when I look at it that way, medical gun still wins. And this is again why I'm like, I thought this is the least useful data to come out of this was the weapon data, because obviously medical gun is a horrible weapon. But it's great on Doctor, and it's great on Lich. And that's the only time I'm going to take that weapon. And in fact, the losses that I had, you'll probably see a video coming out on it, is when I'm playing around with it with other characters, and it is abysmally bad on this and any other character. But for what it's worth, it comes in the highest here because of those Doctor and Lich runs just having 100% win rates. And then, even sorting here is probably just not useful though. Score diff is probably more what we're looking at. And then the laser gun, I guess, is because somehow I went 3-0 on Jack. I can't explain it. Tides come in, tides come out. You can't explain it. Can't explain it. What fighting stick? That's going to be mutant. I guess I did okay with mutant. Shuriken's interesting. Shuriken actually, by far performed the best. If I go back here, actually, you can see it too. I mean, this is not completely useless. Shuriken here. was like six. Well, okay, never mind. I guess that was when I was looking at. I had first gotten my PC data in only, and then I eventually added the Steam Deck when I could figure out how to get those files over. When I looked at the PC, the Shuriken was pretty good. Um, yeah, it was six. Oh, never mind. Okay, I don't know what I'm talking about apparently. I swear I was looking at this before, and it was like 10 wins and 0 losses for Shuriken, but I really don't know what's going on now. But either way, 16-2, it's still pretty good. Still pretty good. But for what it's worth, Shuriken has performed quite well no matter how you look at it. Um, Definitely will be giving more of a respect to Shuriken if I see it on a run where it might make sense to just take it or even pivot to it. But yeah, again, the weapons are so specific to who you're playing that they might as well just you might as well just look at character data. That's kind of how I feel about the weapons. They aren't like they don't end up being that interesting, I feel. And that's it. So, like I said, if you want to contribute to the data analysis or also just want to get your own data sort of analyzed here, feel free to send it to the email that I put in the video description. I think it's like gabrielrundata@gmail.com. I forget. You think I'd know my own email that I use for this by heart, but I don't. I don't. But trust me, I will get to it. I'll also put a little link to Snazaw's mod because you have to have that mod. If you don't have that mod, you will not have these runs being collected. Yeah, so download that mod. If you get a bunch of those recorded, feel free to send them my way. And maybe eventually I'll have like a bunch of players' data to do a big aggregate study on it. And I'll have improved a lot of these panels by then and maybe added a few. Yeah. So let me know if that was insightful. I hope it was. But who knows? Maybe it wasn't. You never know with these things. But I'm just glad that I was able to eventually figure it out. It was something I'd been wanting to do for a long time. And I didn't even know if it would be possible, but it turns out it's possible. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm rambling here. A rambling man. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.